I'm Casey.
And I'm uncomfortable.
And she's about to get more uncomfortable. It's Weird Stuff series right now. We're just kind of picking out some weird passages throughout the Bible and trying to make sense of them. And Mondays was certainly a start to the whole thing.
We shouldn't do the weird stuff.
The start.
And now it shall continue to get weird. So there's this weird passage in 1 Corinthians 11 where Paul's telling men they should have short hair, women they should have long hair. I have talked about this before, so maybe you remember some of the details, or maybe you don't remember anything.
It scarred me for life.
Well, okay, so there was a scholarly paper that came out in the premier Journal of Biblical Literature, the JBL, and really turned this one upside down for a lot of people. It's like, oh, this actually makes sense of the situation. So I'm going to read it to you. And if you already know the answer, try to keep it under wraps while we figure out if she can figure it out. So Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 11. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man was not made for woman, but woman for man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Because of the angels.
I haven't heard you talk about this one, but I have heard someone talk about this one.
Okay, go ahead. Pause us before we continue.
Okay. I know where this is going, and it has to do with our Nephilim episode.
Right, yes. So, to some extent here, we have this weird statement in the middle of it. A wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels, which is a reference back to Genesis 6. In Genesis 6, the angels crossed their boundaries. The sons of God is what they're called, or angels as many of people in the New Testament are going to just more generally refer to them. They procreated with women and gave birth to the giants of the Old Testament, including Goliath and many, many, many others. So yes, to some extent, Paul is saying hey, ladies, when you go to church, you are very beautiful, and angels are at church. So when you go to church, make sure that you have a symbol in some way covering your head so that the angels, while they're there, so that they don't get tempted by you. More or less is where it's going with that. I know that sounds weird to us, but in their time, they expected that when you went to church or just when the Christian community gathered to worship, well, angels worship with us. And so Revelation, for example, paints a picture of churches that each have an angel appointed to it type thing. So Paul's thinking here sounds strange to us, but the idea is if you're going to go to a sacred meeting, don't cause the angels to stumble, just in case that can happen again. So, yes, correct. Weird part number 1. Next part. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, or man of woman, for as man was made from man, so man is now born of woman, and all things are from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair is given to her for a covering. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God. So first off, there's so much there, back and forth, it just gets a little confusing and stuck in your head. So we're just going to zoom in on one part. But for anyone who hears all that and thinks that Paul's being super sexist here, Paul actually endorsed women in ministry all the time and had a very progressive, radical view of men and women in his time. We don't have time to get into all that. Maybe we'll do a series on it down the road. But Jesus did the same thing. Women were the ones that he put the trust in. If anything, Where are the men after Jesus has been killed? They're all hiding in a room while the women show up and are the bold ones who he tells them that he's been resurrected. So the Bible is not as sexist as it sounds, but we don't have time to explain what Paul is actually saying in all this right now. What we are going to talk about in this weird episode is why does nature teach us that men having long hair is bad? And why do women need their hair to
As a covering.
Why do they need to cover their hair, all that? So that's what we're going to zoom in on right now. You want to go there?
No,
you want to break the ice?
I'm going to let you do the thing.
Ancient science was a weird thing.
We're going to put science in quotes on this one.
Ancient science was a weird thing because, it was new. In some ways, they didn't fully understand everything. But their doctors of their times, as we look through the medical journals of ancient history, we realize that one of the things that they thought was that body hair, or just hair in general, is dried semen. And it creates a vacuum that pulls semen throughout your body out of your brain. Because that's where your semen is. It's in your brain and their thoughts. So, men and women in their time, they thought men and women both had semen in their brains, and body hair pulled it as a vacuum where it needed to go. Therefore, women were supposed to have long hair to keep the semen up in their brains because it did not belong elsewhere. Whereas men have more body hair in general to vacuum the semen down to where it eventually needs to go. And if a man has long hair, well, how disgraceful. Why are you keeping all the semen up here with the power of your vacuum hair instead of coursing to the rest of your body? Do we all understand now?
And this is why science was put in quotation marks for this.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have all the science at the time, but this was a scholarly article. It's let's look at the medical journals of old. When we realize that this is what they thought, and man, there's a lot of other things you can get into in ancient time to see that was the way that they thought. We won't go there. It just gets awkward. But given that was the way that they thought, you can see how Paul's suddenly okay, ladies, basically you can't let all that hang out. That your hair is a private part. In fact, I believe the title of that scholarly article was she was given her hair as a testicle instead of as a covering, because the idea was that was where everything was, and it shouldn't be there. That's why women should cover their hair. Also why the angels might be tempted by looking at your head genitalia, more or less. Whereas men should not have all that, because that would be disgraceful to them that they aren't putting it where it belongs. One of two things has happened. We have either gained many more followers on this program or lost all the ones that we currently had. Or, as it usually goes, both at the same time.
Oh, boy.
Look, man, the Bible's got weird stuff, and if you want to understand it, you have to embrace the weirdness, otherwise it's just nonsense. I mean, how much has this passage been used to insult women? Hey, that's not how you go to church. No, they completely missed the understanding of what was going on here from beginning to end. So that's why it's important. Lest you create sexism from science from 2,000 years ago. I think I've made my point. Who's outing this? Someone outro us before I yell a little more.
So, that was episode 2 of the weird stuff. Check out more weird stuff in our previous episode, and maybe more to come.
Maybe, if we're still here. We don't have any grants. We'll probably be around.
No one can pull away our funding.
That's
We
right.
don't have any.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do? Snapple, reach out to us.
There goes my free Snapples.